I am sorry I'm a couple of minutes late.
That's okay. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to now I'm Robin Kluge, and I have been chatting with Jackson Health System for about 6 weeks, maybe just prior to, or just when COVID scared the death out of all of us, or scared us half to death, I should say. And we have now gotten to this day, which I'm very excited about, and I welcome Mr. Carlos Magoya, the President and Chief Executive Officer of Jackson Health, along with Dr. Peter Page, who is the Senior VP and Chief Medical Officer for Jackson Health Systems. We also have Mr. Matthew Pinzu, the Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer, Ms. Flavia Izzo, Executive VP Chief Development Officer. So thank you all very much for taking your time to host this and along with me today. And I thank all the guests that are signing up to hear your words of wisdom. I just want to start by saying that when we began this conversation in early March, it was about, oh my God, what is COVID? And now we're at the point where we're saying, okay, are we staying safe at home or should we step out safely? So today I'm hoping to cover that timeline. And if anyone has questions along the way, type them in chat. We'll try to answer them as we go. And if not, at the end, we'll have a little question and answer session before we log off. So I'm going to turn it over to the panel. Please feel free to start wherever you're comfortable.
Well, thank you, Robin, for facilitating this call, and we really appreciate it. Let's into your comment and what is COVID. So why don't we start off with Dr. Page and let him give us the scientific slash clinical side of COVID, what the virus is, and what we're trying to do about it, and I'll add from there if you don't mind. So with that, Dr. Page.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for putting this together and asking us to join you. I'll give a little bit of an overview of COVID and a little bit of our current state. Talk a little bit about where we were, and obviously, Mr. Magoya can add to it after that point. We'll kind of see if there's any questions, but feel free to interrupt me at any point as questions arise. So COVID is, it's a coronavirus. It's earned the name, the title now, COVID-19. Coronavirus has been around a long time. There's a lot of different variants of coronaviruses. A lot of them cause a typical common cold. This one is a variant that's been much more aggressive, and it really has gotten its aggression from our body's response to the virus itself. And so our bodies, obviously have immune systems that, try to fight off infection. And when this virus hits us, certain individuals, based on a lot of different factors, will have a more aggressive response to the virus, which then can have negative impact on us, on our bodies, by the overreaction that some immune systems are giving to this virus. It triggers a series of events within the body that involves a lot of different organs in the body. And classically, when we saw it initially emerge, it was much more of an upper respiratory infection. You heard people talking about coughs, fevers, sometimes shortness of breath, even some cold type symptoms that made it a little more difficult to distinguish from the common cold. And then we started seeing presentations that were more related to muscle aches, body aches, joint aches. And then we started seeing presentations more related to GI symptoms, abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. So it's really taken a lot of different forms in different individuals. But again, roughly 80% of the patients who acquire coronavirus, test positive for coronavirus, at most have mild symptoms. It's that 20% that's the balance, and about 5% of that 20% really get hit hard by this virus. We've seen over the course of the past couple of months a great variability in presentation, both number, timing, quantity. But we're fortunate enough at this point where we're starting to see a downward trend in Miami-Dade. Our current state, we have about 115 patients that have tested positive that are in one of our facilities, and we've discharged a much higher number, closer to 500 patients over the course of the past 2 months. We continue to maintain close watch on our abilities to manage more patients. Our ventilators right now are using about 30% of our overall ventilators, but of those, less than 20% are being utilized for COVID-related patients. And so we still have a lot of ventilator capacity. We still have a lot of room. We've intentionally shut down some of our volume to make ourselves more able to take care of COVID surges as we've been tracking this over the past couple of months. But I'd be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about what Jackson has done over the course of the past couple of months. The preparedness has been amazing. The leadership team has been amazing, but obviously our overwhelming thanks goes to our frontline workers. They've just been amazing over the past 2 months, providing the highest quality care for very difficult populations, but also very challenging circumstances. We continue to watch our testing processes really closely. We continue to monitor our PPE very closely. Our procurement team has done an amazing job at making sure that we have enough PPE to manage these patients as they come in, along with our baseline patient volumes. And on the testing side and the PPE side, we're constantly looking at opportunities to improve and get better and better. And as we learn more and more about this virus and its presentations and the care that they require, it's really an opportunity for us to collaborate, not just in South Florida and with our major partner at the University of Miami, but also across the state, across the country, and internationally, as it relates to a lot of these places that were a little bit out in front of us as it relates to COVID patients and some of the surging that we saw in weeks, months prior to our real focus, which has been in March, April, and May thus far. So it keeps us on our toes, but obviously, as everyone's aware, the cities and the counties are starting to open back up. And as that does, we want to be prepared for whatever's coming. And so we're constantly, looking at when a resurgence may occur, how it may occur, and what we would do, to help support the community and our patients and their families as it relates to ongoing needs or increased needs as the status of COVID changes. I think that one of the lessons that we've learned over the course of the past couple of months is just how much these presentations change, how much this virus changes as it relates to how people react to it, how many cases we get, how often they're coming in, how they're getting in here, the testing process, and how aggressively some of them are trying to deal with this virus and really struggling. So we maintain our support for our patients, our families, and our community, and we really appreciate all the help and support we've gotten from the community in South Florida as it relates to our ability to continue to stay on top of this very challenging pandemic. And with that, Carlos, I'm sure you have some stuff you want to add or any other places you want me to address.
Thank you, Peter. Let me just add a couple of things from a Jackson standpoint, and I'll talk to you a little bit about the community. And so one of the challenges is when everybody in the community has been looking at COVID, they've been looking at CNN or Fox, and they've been seeing New York being completely overrun with patients. Well, that has not been the case anywhere else in the country, and specifically here in Miami-Dade County. We have an opportunity. Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach are run by very few groups of hospitals, and predominantly it's done by us, Mount Sinai, University of Miami, Baptist, HCA, Tenet, Nicholas Children, of course, Broward Health, Memorial, Holy Cross Cleveland Clinic, and that really covers just about every hospital in South Florida. I think I covered just about all of them. But what we've been doing since the very beginning is every one of us have been getting together. First, originally was every day, and then after that was 3 times a week. Well, we basically were looking at the number of beds, hospitalized beds. The way the media has been looking at this is the number of people that tested positive. Well, as we open more testing sites, of course you're going to have more people testing positive because their percentage of the population is always positive. The question is more important is what percentage of the population is testing positive? That number has been running around the 6.5%, which is lower than what a lot of other places have been. And that has not changed. The other one that's been very important, as the governor as well as the mayor has been tracking, is the number of people in beds, in hospitalized beds. Peter talked about the fact that here we had 115 patients in our entire system, COVID positive. The maximum was 167 over the last 2.5 months. Now picture this, that's in a hospital where we have 1,600 beds. So less than 10%, right at 10% at the peak of our patients were in hospitalized beds. We also learned a lot from New York, where basically less and less ventilators were being used because the outcomes were better when you use less ventilators in this pandemic. So it actually has given us a better outcome. For example, the survival rate in New York City for people in ventilators was 18%. Ours is dramatically higher than that because we learned from them on the things that we needed to do. So there's been a lot of positive stuff. The other thing is our laboratory. We do all our testing in-house. We don't use we started with third parties, but now that we've been able to do it, we do it all in-house. And our docs, which are actually run the laboratory, I've been testing all these machines, and many machines that everybody thought were the greatest of things turned out to have false negatives, a high percentage of false negatives. So we've been retesting and making sure that we stay with the highest quality of tests possible, so that we can have the better outcomes. And today, we are, our patients are isolated, our COVID patients are isolated in specific floors, and the rest of the hospital, basically, we're back to doing elective surgeries and trying to run it as normal as possible. We have a limited number. We really haven't had any visitors. We are now, as of tomorrow, we're going to start having a visitor per patient coming in for elective surgeries, and probably in a couple of weeks we'll have one visitor per patient for all visitors, and that will obviously change over time. So those are the challenges that we have with that. Now, financially, that's also been a problem, because the moment that this started, and we went from having 1,300 or 1,400 people in hospitalized beds and running 100 surgeries a day, we went from that to no surgeries and very few patients, and that dropped our revenues by $40 million a month, at a time in which our expenses increased because obviously we kept all our employees, but then the PPEs and all the other equipment. So that has been a challenge. The federal government help has done some help, and we don't know exactly what the final numbers are going to be on that, so we continue to work on that. And frankly, Flavia and her team with the foundation have done a really good job with the community, where we have actually raised approximately $3.5 million, I think is the number right about now, from a community perspective. That's also been helpful in helping us with some of the revenues and challenges, as well as the expense increases. To your point, Robin, that you had about whether we should go out or not, there's a lot of different concerns out there and a lot of questions. And obviously everybody talks about the mask and the gloves. And I'm not a doctor, but I will tell you, I've probably learned more about this pandemic than I ever wanted to know in my life. But I will tell you this, the important thing is to be socially distant, to be up over 6 feet. And when you cannot be socially distant, then you want the mask. A challenge with a mask is that if you have a mask on and that mask gets wet for whatever reason, whether it's rain, perspiration, or you sneeze into it, anything else, the mask stops being effective. The moisture in the mask allows particles to go through, and it's an effective mask. So therefore, if anybody's out there jogging or exercising, or now starting next Monday going to the beach when it's hot and the mask gets wet, that's not going to help. So the more important thing is, when you're doing any kind of those exercises, you're better off not having a mask, but staying socially distant from people, and making sure that and 6 feet is what we're all saying. So that's the important piece. And the masks that you should be using are basically, a surgical mask, something as simple as this. People have been talking about N95, and those N95s are masks, or KN95s, depending what you've been talking, are oxygen retardant masks. They're used by our people when they're actually doing procedures in which there's going to be something coming in the air directly at them. So that's the only time you use them. You can't use an N95 at all times, because it cuts the oxygen coming into your body, which is not necessarily a good thing. So a surgical mask, which does cut some of the air coming at you, but it's still enough, is actually the best way to go about it. And then gloves are wonderful, but sometimes an over-reliance on gloves is not a good thing. The important thing is to make sure that you wash your hands on a regular basis, whether you do it with Purell or just soap and water. Minimally 20 seconds at every time that you do it, because we all have a tendency, we don't know we're doing it. We put our fingers in our mouth or in our nose or in our eyes, and then in dirty hands, it gets the virus from potential touches that you may have from people or anywhere else and get it into your body that way, especially getting into the mucous membrane. So we've been working a lot with the mayor, or I've been working a lot with the mayor and the governor, and how to open the county and the state in South Florida. And frankly, the bottom line is, as long as the hospitalized beds continues to drop, that's what we're focused on. The challenge that we have today, right now, is nursing homes, because a lot of the nursing homes did not have the proper PPEs and do have a lot of the challenges. People, by far, the greater percentage of people that are at risk with this virus are people over 65 or 70 years of age with other comorbidities, specifically obesity and diabetes as in priority, and probably, Peter, your lung and heart is probably third and fourth, correct?
Yeah, diabetes, heart disease, lung disease, obesity, and any disease that compromises your immune system.
So Dr. Page, is that where the highest risk is for contracting it, or that's the highest risk for people who have a bad enough reaction to it that they need to be hospitalized?
It's more for the seriousness of the infection. So the people that are at risk of having more complications from the COVID-19 infection are the ones with these comorbidities and greater than 65 years old. The only thing I was going to add to Carlos's comments, he makes a great point about the social distancing. We really also like to reference it as being socially aware. So, you know, a lot of people will wear masks and simple masks, and they may block some things, they may protect other people from you, but, you know, you're also cognizant of the fact that, you know, this is out there and you're trying to be smart about how you interact with other people and the types of environments you get into. And so masks are a constant reminder of that.
A few questions that are coming in that I can see from the participants are which tests we're finding to be the most accurate, whether we can reuse masks and what we have to do to safely reuse masks, and whether things like high blood pressure or being on an ACE inhibitor are also those risk factors that might make people more susceptible to a serious condition with it.
So with the testing, we run 3 platforms primarily, currently in-house. One is called Cepheid, one is called Elitech, and one is called Qiagen. They are all very good, and they're all very accurate. And they're all nasopharyngeal swabs, typically, or oral pharyngeal swabs, where, you know, typically we go into the nostril and then down into the nasopharynx. And those are testing specifically for the virus. We do have antibody testing available, but that's more testing the antibodies you build up from exposure to the virus. So when we're trying to make the diagnosis, typically we're using one of these first 3 test platforms that I just mentioned. And they're all very good. They just have different turnaround times. We don't get the results as quickly as we do with others.
Dr. Peter, I have a question for you. I understand that the hospital was able to obtain one of the few very special machines early on that gave the result. We're able to test hundreds of people and get results quickly. And I was very impressed that Jackson was one of the places in the world that got one of these very limited machines. Was I given correct information? And if yes, what was that machine?
So yes, the answer to that was a machine called the Abbott, made by Abbott. Actually, President Trump talked about the machine, and we were lucky enough to get that machine because it was an immediate result, like in 5 or 10 minutes. The problem was that we tested that machine compared to our testing, it had a 30% error rate. So we have stopped using that machine. And we actually tested it. We called the manufacturer. They tried to do different things. We responded, and for about 2-3 weeks, everybody was still talking about the machine when we knew about their error rate. And eventually now they've talked about the error rate of the machine. So that's an example. Thank you for doing that, Robin. That's an example of many different things. Because remember, all of this is brand new and it hasn't been tested. So they think they got it right, and then when people are testing them, that's when you find out about it. So that's been a challenge. But we have rapid tests today. Peter can talk better about that. We have tested, depending on the situation, we can have an answer within an hour, 3 hours, and some of them, all of them certainly within 24 hours. Right, Peter?
Yeah, the Cepheid platform is, we generally get the results back within an hour. And so, we can use those when we need to, but again, there's a certain amount of testing capabilities that we have. And so we have to use the test based on the clinical situation, how fast we need the result back. So we've developed a whole protocol as to when we're using which test, but all three of these platforms are very accurate.
And
Robin, I think you may have been referring to the QIAGEN platform. That's one of the three that we are still using that's very reliable and very specialized, and that the foundation helped us secure part of that platform.
I just heard there was some unusual machine that was very hard to get and that Jackson had it.
Well, the QIAGEN was the one, good point, Matt. Thank you very much. Was one that we actually flew in here from Hong Kong. It was a German company out of Hong Kong, and we got it flown in here, and I don't even know how we got everybody to go along with it at the time, and everything was difficult to get, but we got it in here, and we were lucky to do that. And that also is a highly reliable. But the one that got a lot of hype was the Avid, which actually, unfortunately, was not that good. But we've not only been doing the testing, but we actually been looking at reliability of the testing, and which brings me to another point. A lot of people want to get antibodies done. Because they said I had a cold in December or in January, I had a fever. I know I had COVID. I want to know to get the antibodies for that. So a lot of those antibody tests right now still have a lot of not reliable numbers. We are working, and we think by the end of this week, some of us are getting more reliable on what the G antibodies, which are the ones for the immunity side. And that really tells you whether you had but all of those tests are getting better. So I think over the next week or two, you'll hear more about antibody testing and how that will be more accessible for people to really find out whether they had the virus or not, and they have developed the antibodies.
And Matt, I know you had brought up a couple other questions. People do reuse masks. We typically recommend using surgical masks, as Carlos referenced. We use one a day. But in the community, people are using them, on day to day. But the big issue is that they can't be soiled, wet, contaminated. And that's what Carlos had referenced as the reasons to not reuse masks. We do see people wearing N95s in the hospital. Again, those are different masks, largely directed towards trying to minimize exposure in aerosol generating procedures. And we see a lot of people in the communities wearing homemade masks or masks they've gotten from other entities that, again, they typically will and try to reuse. But as Carlos alluded to, it's more the awareness that you're wearing a mask and socially distance and trying to be cognizant of your surroundings so that you minimize the risk of exposure.
Somebody asked in the chat about how to just think about our social interactions in places like public spaces and restaurants. And I know Dr. Page started talking about that. I don't think there are going to be really hard and fast rules, because as different kinds of places open up in different situations, the guidance that we're getting from the public health experts, and obviously that our experts like Dr. Page and some of the infectious disease staff are giving, is really about being conscious of where you are. You've heard many, many times, the mask is not so much to protect you as it is to protect everyone around you. So we really look at that mask wearing, especially when you're indoors, especially when you're in an enclosed space, as a way to protect other people, kind of a show of respect. When we talk about outdoor spaces, I will tell you that my family and I went to a restaurant for the first time last week. We sat outside on a patio, and the tables were spaced pretty far apart. And as long as we felt like we were 6 feet away from everyone else, we weren't wearing masks sitting outside. I'm a runner. When I go running, I know when Carlos goes biking, he's a bicyclist. I don't wear a mask for something like that because it's going to get sweaty and it's going to be not useful. And when you're already 6 feet away from people, incidentally passing somebody on the street even if you get closer than 6 feet to them for a few seconds, that's probably not a real strong risk factor.
You got to use your brain. At the end, I see this all the time. I live in Coconut Grove, and people walking past each other, they're going like 15 feet away, and they're overreacting, getting in the middle of the street. Well, their own safety, they might get run over. So let's just because you're passing by someone 3 feet away, there's no contact. This is not an aerosol thing unless somebody's sneezing or something. So you can use your common sense on some of the things. Social distancing is important. And when you go into a restaurant, whether you're going inside a restaurant, and they're doing it now, it's actually doing a very nice job of keeping the tables all far apart. As long as you will be sitting with some of your people, and the idea is that you will be within 3 feet distance from each other, and obviously you're not directly in front of by each other. So that kind of works. And of course, that's why everybody promotes being in the family or not. There are going to be some risks, but it's going to be minimal risk, and that's why the mask is important. Of course, you can't eat with a mask on, but getting to the table and back, wearing the mask it's important to make sure that you're protected within that 6 foot distance of passing somebody else.
Another question came up in the Q&A. Somebody who has family in the UK and in Italy, and asking really two different questions. When do we think it's going to be okay for them to travel here? And whether there are places that they can get medical insurance just short term for a couple of months that includes coverage for COVID-19. I'll ask Dr. Page to answer when he feels like it's going to be safe for them to come here. But remember that is somewhat divorced from when the federal government is going to start allowing a higher volume of incoming international flights. So you've got a regulatory question, and then Dr. Page can probably touch on that medical question. And Carlos probably knows more than I do as far as what kind of short-term insurance products are out there, because I'm not familiar with that.
And I would say, this is still evolving. We really don't know. I would be, personally, I'd be nervous right now to jump on a plane and fly long distances. I think part of it is because as we continue to open up, we just don't know, what's going to happen with the resurgence in different parts of the country or the world. I think that eventually, as the airlines continue to embrace, the preparation for the coronavirus, for COVID-19, and I think as people continue to learn more and more about it, I think that, people are going to start flying again. I would be curious to hear Carlos's response, because I'm still looking at July, maybe August, as potentially when planes are going to start getting busier and busier again. But I can't tell you definitively just because we don't know now and then. Very difficult to predict. But obviously planes are going to be a risk of exposure when you put a lot of people, especially in close proximity to each other, as we've seen, over the past couple of months. There is a risk, but there's a risk in a lot of stuff that we do. So eventually it's gonna have to take off again.
Thank you very much for that vote of confidence, Peter, as I get ready to go on a plane to Aspen, Colorado next Friday. But
wear your mask.
The process that they've got right now with the airlines, which I'm very intimately familiar and talked to the airport director quite a bit about it, is that they obviously are doing a really good job of cleaning the planes, but forgetting that they clean the planes. It's also safe to make sure you take your own, your mask, as well as the ability to clean everything around you and stay within your seat. And they're keeping them socially distant between seats. So I think that someone is protected, but then again, it's up to the individual and how you feel about it. And someone is going to feel more comfortable, like I do, getting on a plane, and someone is not going to feel as comfortable. So you have to do what you feel is most comfortable for you. Robin, you had a question. I'm sorry.
Yes, I did. My question is, throughout this meeting this morning, there's been several inferences of, we don't know what to expect or if there's a resurgence. What is the nitty-gritty behind your thoughts on this subject? We're opening up restaurants. I understand that some are doing this social distancing, and then I've heard where others have packed people in like sardines. So it's very hard to control anything except our immediate environment. So if we decide to step out and we find ourselves in situations that we feel compromised, what's going on behind the scenes? What are you thinking is going to happen now that we're reopening, and when?
The point about pack the sardines, if it's anywhere in Miami-Dade County, I know that our people would want to know, because they're being, what I mean by our people, I'm talking about public safety, because they're being really, really strong about making sure that we don't have those issues. And I don't know of any place that's happening at this point. But if you feel at any time uncomfortable about the area that you're in, the first thing you should do is step away and stay socially distant. Look, Peter said it, I think, very correctly, that really 97% of the people that get the virus are either not going to know they have the virus, or they're going to have some very mild symptoms that they don't even know it. In some cases, they may think they got a cold. This virus is no different than it behaves like another flu. It's just more contagious, and it's deadlier for people with comorbidities. But it still behaves like a regular flu. And people, nobody ever thought about when you had a cold not going to work. I think people are going to change how they look at that in the future. I'm one that, when I had a cold, I went to work. I'm not sure if we're going to be doing that in the future, not for myself, but for other people, especially as we're now learning to use, different virtual ways of communicating, and we don't necessarily have to be in the office when you're not feeling well, and you can work out of the home. So we're learning all these new things. I think and people are being observant about these things, and people are not getting crazy, at least what I see for the most part. So there will be a second wave, and there will be a third wave, which happens in every flu and every virus. Some of these, by the way, some of these viruses that Dr. Page was talking about, some of the coronaviruses that have been happening for decades, they still don't have vaccines for them. We may or may not have a vaccine for this, but how you deal with this is a social distancing, and the less people that get infected, the flu starts going away over time and gets down to a minimal. But let's hope there's a vaccine. But we got to learn how to live with it while the flu is there without a vaccine, because we don't know if we're ever going to get one.
The other thing is, it's important to remember how different this is region by region, not just state by state. And sometimes because we're so bombarded with, whether you're getting your news on cable or over social media or whatever, news about something happening in South Miami tends to look the same as news about something that's happening in rural Wyoming, right? There is probably a lot less risk to going into a 50% full restaurant in rural Wyoming than there is doing it in Aventura right now. So we need to really stay attuned to the fact that more and more, this is going to be a different phenomenon in different states and different counties at different times. So there may be times where one community is really peaking, like Manhattan was, a month ago, where another large city may really be kind of in a lull. So your comfort level with doing different things, like Carlos said, you have to kind of set your own comfort level, but that comfort level may be different in August and in October and in February. I also want to make sure that I don't lose. Bill asked a question about this short-term insurance.
So
Carlos
I haven't heard of a short-term insurance related to COVID. There are such things as the Obamacare insurance that you can actually get. And again, any of those, you can actually get insurance for any kind that you can drop after some period of time. But there is no such thing as a short-term insurance related to COVID at this point in time, at least that I've heard of.
And I'd be really wary about anything that advertises itself as COVID insurance or as short-term insurance. And I would check with the Florida Office of Insurance Regulation, because there are a lot of times that products try and skirt around the edges of the regulations. And then when somebody needs it, they go to find out that the coverage isn't really there.
Remember that insurance gets paid by the people that are not sick, because it's the majority of the people. So if everybody that gets the insurance is sick, it's not going to be very sustainable. So to Matt's point, I think I would be very leery at this point in time of anything to that effect. But there are definitely insurance policies out there that you can get on Obamacare that really you can get on a moment's notice without having any issues with whatever illness you may have in the past. There's a question here about an interesting question that I'll give it a shot, and I'd like Peter's thoughts on this. What are your thoughts about thermal temperature scanners and their implementation in post-quarantine society? Look, the problem with the thermal test is it can be a false confidence. Not everybody that has COVID has a temperature. And just because you can say my temperature is 97.3, I'm safe, you may still have COVID and you may still be infecting other people. So, and I know that we're using thermal testing, but that doesn't preclude anyone from having the social distancing. And this goes back to Mayor Jimenez's point that he used to say over and over again, just assume everybody has COVID. So therefore, even if the people have no temperature, stay socially distant from them. Peter?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it helps you if you identify a fever in somebody that may or may not have symptomatology. It may, flag them as something different, but there are a lot of patients that we're seeing that don't have fevers. And so you can't use that as an exclusive rule-out screening process. The other thing I would add, when we talk about a resurgence, resurgences mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. For us, as a healthcare system, we have to be ready. Oftentimes for the unpredictable, which Jackson is notoriously well known for, is our preparation. So we're constantly preparing for things that other people may not be prepared for. And when you see a lot of these areas that have really been hit, oftentimes they were hit before they were as well prepared as they could be, or in some cases where they couldn't have known it was coming, but it catches them off guard. Fortunately for us, we started our preparation long before we started getting cases in our health system. And so we were more prepared, but now everybody's more prepared. And so if the number of cases starts increasing again, it's going to be a different way that we're going to handle it based on everything we've learned over the past several months and everything that healthcare systems have done to better prepare for a potential resurgence. For us, we're tracking number of positive cases, and as Carlos alluded to as well, the more testing we do and the more positive cases we're going to get. So we're not overreacting to the number of positive cases, but we're trying to do all we can to mitigate the risk for the high-risk population.
We have two questions there that I think, Matt, if you don't mind, we should address. The first one is, how long do droplets stay in the air when someone coughs or sneezes? It's not so much the droplets being in the air, it's really the projectile. If you sneeze or you cough, the projectile of your substance going across to someone, and that's the reason for the 6-foot distance, where you actually have a direct sneeze that may hit your body and you have contact that when it goes in your body is actually the issue, which is the reason for the mask and making sure so there's all, they don't have a specific, I don't believe at this point, on how long it takes in the air, but in the air itself, if somebody sneezes and you walk by 20 minutes later, it's not going to do anything, even if the droplets are there, or 10 minutes later. It's only when those droplets hit the surface and you may touch that surface that may be a challenge. And again, those happen fairly quickly. That's the reason why washing their hands as often as possible is extremely important. And that's the challenge behind that.
And as you're seeing stories in the media about that, and I say this as a longtime former reporter, be careful about exactly what you're reading, because there's a difference between the virus can be detected on a surface after 12 hours, after 2 days, after 3 days, and whether that virus whether there is enough of it and it is viable enough to infect you.
Correct.
So I think what we are starting to find is the virus may be detectable on that package that you bring in from UPS that was, that you left to sit for 24 hours before you picked it up, but it is extremely unlikely that that is viable enough to cause an infection. And in fact, I think there was a study of studies that looked at 400 people who were infected, and they found no evidence that anyone was infected from surface contact. And I think one of those 400 looks like it occurred outdoors.
Joyce had a question about enforcing masks in businesses. There is a mayor's executive order as well as a governor's order that says if you're inside a business, particularly retail places, restaurants, you must wear a mask. you must wear a mask unless you're actually sitting down to eat. That's the only time you're not allowed. You don't have to wear the mask. And pools, by the way, which will open next Monday, if you're on the decks, you have to wear a mask. If you're in the pool itself, you don't have to wear a mask. For the previous point that we previously mentioned, that obviously you get in a pool, the mask will get wet, and you don't have a mask effective anymore. But
Broward County is slightly different on that. Broward County is not requiring masks on pool decks as long as you are 6 feet separated.
Okay, but and that's the case here as well. If you look at the rule from the county, it talks about wearing a mask when you're within 6 feet. Nowhere do you have to wear a mask in Dade County if you're more than 6 feet socially distant. They talk about socially distant first, and wear a mask if you're going to be within 6 feet. That is the actual definition of the rule in Miami-Dade County, which is the same in Broward, by the way. Thank you for that correction, Matt.
And then I see there's another question in the chat about how long masks and social distancing are going to just be part of our lives. And the answer that I think we've heard over and over again, nationally and internationally, is until there is either a safe and reliable cure for it, a safe and reliable inoculation against it, or enough evidence that having it, surviving it, that the antibodies will actually last more than 6 months or a year, we may get to some level of herd immunity. But I think, I think until there is an inoculation or a cure, we can be looking at 12 to 18 months of this.
Yeah, I think what's going to happen is, and remember, we're going through stages on how we open up businesses. Even the stage we're going in right now of opening restaurants and beaches and hotels and so forth, it's only one phase. So we're going to be wearing masks for a while as we're opening all these phases, because it's not when you open it, it's 2-3 weeks later that you find out whether by that opening, whether you actually increase the risk. So the monitoring of hospitalized patients on COVID will be a lot of the barometer on what that does. And as we're going through all these phases, we're gonna need to know until we get a vaccine. But in the meantime, I think you're gonna have minimally 4 to 6 months, if not 12 or 18, like Matt said. But it's gonna be slowly going away as we find out exactly where we are with the virus.
Peter, there was a question in the chat that I think would be good for you. Actually, 2 questions. First of all, should people over 65 be getting flu shots? I think our answer is going to be everybody should be getting a flu shot unless it's medically contraindicated. And then the question was if you know of any good vaccines in the works. I know that's a very preliminary thing. Maybe you can speak to that, but also speak to what you're seeing at Jackson as far as treatments for people who are hospitalized, what appears to be effective.
Yeah, so obviously we encourage vaccinations, not just in the greater than 65 age group, but that is a high-risk age group. So, unless it's contraindicated, as Matt already alluded to, we're big proponents of vaccinations, and for the pneumovax vaccination as well. I think that we have to wait and see how this vaccination develops. It's being tested in a lot of different places across the world, and there are human trials being performed now. I've seen several that look like they're very promising, but again, it's pretty early. And as we've been trying to reinforce throughout this discussion, this is still changing. This is evolving. We're learning more and more about it. We're learning more and more about treatments and testing. And we just have to be ready for, kind of the changes that may come based on the more we learn. When you talk about vaccines, we're going to see vaccines, and we want to see, obviously, the vaccine generate the needed impact on the virus and make sure and see how long it lasts for. There's a lot of different things that could happen. The virus could change. It could take another form at some point. So there's a lot of this stuff that we have to keep our finger on the pulse of to try to make sure that we're responsive to the new findings and the new stuff that we learn. But in general, vaccinations are a positive, especially around those high-risk disease processes.
The journal, medical journals on Monday talked about 12 different human trials that are going on for vaccines at this point in time, which actually helped the market get move really well. And then there's several dozens that feel positive about futures. But to Peter's point, there could be variations on the strain. There could be a lot of different things. So I think let's hope we get a vaccination, but we got to continue to work on the social distancing and the things we're doing to reduce the virus without a vaccination in the meantime, because typically a vaccination takes 6 to 8 years. Getting a vaccination in a period of time like this, which would be 6 months to a year, it's never been seen before. I'm not saying it can't happen, but it could happen. But we got to continue to work on the social distancing and get out of the virus on the traditional, natural way rather than just through vaccination.
There's
I have
another
a
question in
question.
the, oh, sure.
I've been trying to ask you a question, so hang on.
Thank you. I have a question. With all of your knowledge about vaccine development, the next question comes logically is, okay, so we're rushing a vaccine. Would you recommend being one of the first people to try it, or would you say that's risky as well?
Well, I think we have to wait and see what the studies come out as. There are people who are getting them. And so they're learning a lot from the people who are on these first line trials, to see how their body responds, to make sure they don't have adverse effects, but to make sure the required or the impact that we want it to see actually occurs. So I think we need to see what they learn over the course of the next few months as they continue these human trials. I think that we're going to have a pretty good idea whether or not it's safe before it's offered out there to anyone to choose to participate. I think the question is going to be, not just safety, but efficacy. And so that's going to be something that we have to see how the trials pan out and how the studies pan out.
Well, thank you for that, because I think a lot of people that I speak with, are anxious for a vaccine, yet at the same time saying, well, I'm not going to be the first one to get it because we don't know if it's going to be safe or not. Before we wrap up today, I'd like to ask a few more questions on behalf of questions that I'm getting on my phone. But can we touch a little bit briefly on what we're seeing with children and COVID? And a lot of children under 2, they don't have to wear masks, yet we see that children are getting affected in small amounts, but yet they still are.
Robin, if you don't mind, I have to sign off. I have something I got to do now. I apologize.
Okay, I have one question for you before you do, and thank you.
Dr. Page is unequivocable and mad to deal with it, but go ahead.
The question for you is, will you come back and do this again?
I'm happy to do this anytime.
Thank you.
Flavia knows that, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.
Sorry that I had to leave, but I
That's
apologize.
okay.
Bye.
Thank you. So, Dr.
Peter, you were going to talk about the children and the MISC.
Yes.
So
thank you.
there's a syndrome that's developed, and it's called the multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children, otherwise known as MIS-C. And it's an interesting syndrome, and it presents in a lot of different ways. A lot of the classic symptomatology that we're seeing across the country right now really relates to the GI system. People are coming in with unusual abdominal pain, sometimes with diarrhea, sometimes with nausea, obviously fevers. The interesting component has been the rash feature. And so as this emerged, it presents in an appearance like a disease that we've known about that's relatively rare, but we've known about for quite a while in pediatric population called Kawasaki's disease. And when this hits, there's been some studies that show that there is potentially a link to COVID-19. Now that's still not definitively been proven. And there are some, because it's such a variable presentation, not everybody comes in with the same symptoms. And some people come in with unusual symptoms that you would never think are this syndrome, but end up turning out to be the syndrome. It's not really anything that we can say is a classic, oh, the person develops right lower quadrant abdominal pain, as we see with appendicitis, and that's a classic presentation. So having said that, we are seeing these emerge in a lot of different age populations, starting from the very young. We're seeing some now in the early 20s that people are presenting with this type of a syndrome. Some kids get really sick. The majority of kids, do well with it. Kids have been very resilient to the COVID-19 virus in general, but also they're pretty resilient to this syndrome. Part of the problem is that we have to have our our attention being closely paid to these atypical presentations in our emergency departments, our clinics, and our hospitals. So we've been doing a lot of education with our staff about watching out for anything that could be presenting like this. But as you've heard, you know, a lot of the information that's come out about COVID-19, especially early on, was, well, it doesn't negatively impact kids. Well, it can. And we've seen cases where kids have gotten very sick from COVID-19 in and of itself. This multi-system inflammatory syndrome is a little bit of a variant. And again, it seems to be your body's response to potentially this virus. But if kids get in, recognize it, get in and get care, you know, the majority seem to be doing quite well with it if they get the supportive care they need.
So in summary, it kind of sounds like this virus is like playing Russian roulette. It's just where the ball is going to land and how your particular body is going to react to it without really knowing ahead.
Well, and I think it's a virus that we didn't know a lot about, you know, as it relates to the COVID-19 component. We've known a lot about coronaviruses in general, but this one's a little bit different. It could be for a lot of reasons, but we continually see different presentations, different symptoms. We see a lot of different responses to different therapies. We see a lot of different age populations that get it. We see sometimes healthy young people get very, very sick. But obviously the population that appears to be most at risk are those greater than 65 with the comorbidities that we had mentioned and Carlos had mentioned previously.
Well, thank
someone
you.
in the chat is asking about lockdowns and how long they should last and are they useful. And I think there are a couple of schools of thought on that. The one that you really heard most when this first started was about flattening the curve. And flattening the curve, the purpose of that was to make sure that hospitals like ours didn't get overwhelmed. Because what happens when you top out a hospital's capacity, and this is what happened in Italy, and you know, to some degree may have happened in New York, is once you don't have enough capacity to take care of everybody at the level they need care, then not only are the hospitals just overwhelmed, but now, you know, if Peter and I both need the same piece of equipment and there's only one, now you have to decide whether Peter or I is going to get that equipment. So not only are you having more people get it at the same time, but you're going to have some people who aren't able to get the level of care they need because it's not available. I think it looks like in most communities so far, we have not gotten to the point where we're maxing out the capacity of the hospitals. The other school of thought on this is that you want to keep lockdowns going to some degree for as long as you can until you get to some kind of vaccine or really effective therapeutic for it. And that could be a whole other discussion with public health people and with psychologists, because there's some indication that, you know, the longer you lock people down, the less effective a lockdown gets. In fact, if you want a great piece of trivia for your next Zoom cocktail party, the word quarantine, the etymology of that word is 40 days. The whole point was that you would do a lockdown that from the beginning was very, very defined, and that if you told people it was going to end after that time, that people would be more likely to comply with it. Whereas if people just thought it was going to go on indefinitely, some people are going to get tired of it after 2 weeks, some people are going to get tired of it after 2 months. So this is another kind of thing where everybody's going to have to use their own judgment about what they're willing to do. You know, the government can tell you that buildings are closed. They can tell you it's illegal to do something. They can't force you to go do pretty much anything. So they can say that the restaurants are open again. Whether or not restaurants open and stay open depends on how many people go to the restaurants in those first couple of weeks. You know, we've got lots of friends who own restaurants, and they can't afford to open at 25% capacity. So I think that's just going to be another one where we're going to have to see what happens with the vast majority of people, and everybody's going to have to make their own decisions about what they're comfortable with. In fact, Esther had a question about this in the chat as well, about dating in the era of coronavirus. And it's just going to be like, when's the first time you have people over for dinner, right? It kind of depends on how well you know those people, how much you trust those people, and how much exposure they've had. My 70-something-year-old parents are going to come to town hopefully in a couple of weeks for the first time because they want to see my 10-year-old daughter. I'm perfectly happy having my 10-year-old daughter go see them because my daughter has been in quarantine since this started. I may not go see them because I've been going up and back to the hospital some. So I've been out in the world a little bit more, and I'm probably at higher risk of bringing something to their house.
That's very good advice. Thank you, Matthew. If there's not any further questions, then I just would like to, again, thank the people that were on this call today, starting with Mr. Magoya, the CEO, Dr. Peter Page, the Chief Medical Officer. Matthew, you turned out to be a great asset, and thank you so much because you really did a great job in facilitating this between the questions and the chat. So this is Matthew, the Chief VP and Chief Marketing Officer. Thank you. And just one last question. People have been asking me, what can they do? This is a public health system. It is a nonprofit, and people have been asking me, what can they do? So if Flavia has just a minute to kind of share some information briefly, I would love to hear from her before we close this meeting and thank everybody for joining in. And I'm very much hoping that Dr. Peter Page will come back on again with me and all of you, because I think I'd like to check back in about 6 or 8 weeks and see where we're at now. And I think all the people that are on this Zoom would be very interested to kind of follow it. So is everybody game for a future visit?
Absolutely.
For sure.
Okay, great.
Thank you for having us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I was getting a lot of great information from Betty, and who's with the foundation. And it just dawned on me to, it had to be shared. So this was my platform for sharing all this information that I consider is coming from extremely trusted resources. So thank you. And Flavia, if you could just take a moment and answer what people can do.
Sure. First, let us thank you really for putting this together and hosting this. We're grateful for the opportunity, and I think it's been fantastic in all of the questions, and we'd love to be able to follow up and do it again in 6 to 8 weeks. But briefly to tell you, our role at the foundation during this pandemic has been really to work with the system and the community and try to fill whatever needs we were able to fill. Anything with regards to personal protective equipment, medical supplies, some testing equipment that you talked about, additional resources with regards to housing for staff on the front line that didn't have the ability to go home, really didn't want to risk infecting their family members, and then obviously raising funds. Carlos talked about the financial crisis that our healthcare system, along with others across the country, were facing with the lack of elective procedures. So to really step in that role and kind of fill that void and that gap is what the foundation has been doing. And we've made some really great partnerships and made some really great strides. And like you talked about, we're a little over $3.5 million in cash contributions and probably closer to $4 million in in-kind donations, right, with some of that housing and the personal protective equipment. So if anyone is interested in continuing to help us in that effort and support us, please feel free to reach out to the foundation, and we'd be happy to work with you and host things like this and get other individuals involved, and more support, and obviously financial support is always welcome. So we're grateful for the opportunity.
Robin, if I could just add one thing to what Flavia said, which is so true, because we're part of Miami-Dade County government. Unlike other hospital systems in town that have really, really large endowments that are helping carry them through this time, because we are a public agency, we're not sitting on, $1 or $2 billion in cash like some of the other hospital systems in South Florida are. All of the surplus that we make any given year gets drilled right back into our programs and to our staff, so that we always have the best doctors and the best nurses available and the best programs and the best facilities available for our community. But when you look at a system like ours, with about a $1.8 billion a year budget, and that our surplus in any given year on that budget is somewhere in the neighborhood of $5, $10, $15 million if we have a good year. A hit like this is a body blow. And so far, Carlos has been really committed to two main things: not compromising the level of care and not hitting the paychecks of the nurses and the doctors especially. We've been fortunate that so far we've been able to do that. But I will tell you that at the height of this, when we had no elective procedures going on, we were losing $1 million a day just because our expenses are high to run a teaching hospital like this. So the work that the foundation has been doing, Robin, the work that you do when you help bring attention to this and focus on our institution, that's the reason that Jackson has been able to survive for 102 years in this community. And if we're going to be here for the next 102, it's going to be because of meetings like this, where we help educate people not just about what's happening in the community, but the role that Jackson plays in it. So thank you for that.
Thank you again, everyone. I would like to also thank, I'll reintroduce myself. I don't even know if I introduced myself. I'm Robin Kluge, and I am a community member here in Miami for the last 15 years, from New York originally. I work with Douglas Elliman, the real estate agency, and I'm mentioning that because this Zoom happened today because they're behind the scenes making it happen. So they're supporting me Zooming with you. So we're all in this together. And I want to thank them and my team behind me, Gus and Imad. If it wasn't for the two of you, this wouldn't have happened. So thank you. And with that, we look forward to maybe doing this again in the future where we have some more updates. And I think it's great because I feel, and I hope everybody would agree, again, it's about getting information from trusted resources because we're hearing so many different things. We don't know, our heads are swimming. And it is a point in time right now at this moment that we're all thinking about stepping out and we want to be safe. So thank you so much, everyone today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.